Hi, so I wanted to do a quick video today because the Institute for Fiscal Studies put a report out on the amount of wealth that people have in their 30s, and it's around half what people who were a decade older had at the same time. So people in their 30s now have about 27,000 in pensions and housing wealth, and people who are 10 years older than them had around 53,000 at the same time. So it's quite a big drop in personal wealth, and I wanted to do a video on it just because it's something that's quite close to my heart because I'm 35, and I think this report is great because it shows that our age group, our generation, aren't just moaning when they say they've got no money and they can't afford to buy a house and they can't afford to save, and that it's not that they're not being frugal, that they don't have much pension saving. They are victims of an economic cycle, and it sucks. And I've moaned to my parents and my parents-in-law in the past about not having enough for this and that, and I don't think they've really got it. I don't think they've really understood how difficult it is. Because it wasn't the same in their day. They say that it was, but it really wasn't, and this report proves that it wasn't. They were able to save for a house because housing costs weren't as high. And now the problem for people in their 30s is the cost of renting is so much higher than the cost of home ownership. It's completely the wrong way around, and it makes it impossible to save if the amount you're paying in rent for the same type of property is, say, £1,500 a month. Whereas if you actually bought that property outright, a mortgage might be more like £1,000 a month. It makes it so difficult, and I don't think the older generations have properly understood that. And it's not their fault, they were lucky, their economic timing was lucky, and for people in their 30s, it just is really unlucky. But there are things that we can do about it, and I'll move on to that. We might not be able to save as much, but we can save something. The other thing is that our wages have stagnated, basically. So the report found that when we started working life, we being people in our 30s, we had higher salaries, fairly decent starting salaries, but those salaries haven't increased at the same rate that they increased for people who are 10 years older. And obviously that's a problem, and it means we have less money, so we have less money to save and do all the things that we're told we should do, like put money aside for a pension and put money into junior ISAs for our children and all of that kind of thing. Another thing that people in their 30s have to wrestle with, not all people in their 30s, but those with children, is the cost of childcare, which is astonishing, and nobody really tells you about that because nobody's really been through it in quite the same way as this generation. As you can see from behind me, I've got children, and we've spent an absolute fortune on childcare because the oldest has only just gone to school and the youngest is still being looked after when I'm working and doing things like this video. At one point we spent about £900 a month on childcare, and it's not that much lower than that now. The other thing that the IFS report pointed out was the pension changes to the types of pension that people have now. So people used to have what's called defined benefit pension schemes, and that's when you paid into a pension, and at the end of your working life you would get an income in retirement that was a proportion of your final salary when you retired, and that gave people lots of certainty about the amount of money they would have when they retired. And very often those schemes were quite generous, so people would end up with quite a lot of money in retirement even though they weren't working. Those schemes have pretty much vanished. The IFS said that only 10% of people in their 30s, less than 10% in fact, have them now. And what we have now, if we have a pension at all, because that's another thing, lots of self-employed people don't actually save into a pension, and lots of employer schemes aren't as generous as they could be. But if you are lucky enough to be saving into a pension, then what you will probably have is a defined contribution scheme, which is just a scheme that sets the contribution you make rather than the amount you have in retirement. That could still be not that generous. So that the shift away from defined benefit to defined contribution is another thing that has caused this drop in personal wealth for people in their 30s. not something that's that easy to get to grips with, but it will make a difference to you the older you get. If you're in your 30s now thinking that's not that relevant, yes, you're not going to retire for another 30 years, 40 years, but actually it is quite relevant to you, because at the moment people in their 30s aren't saving enough for a decent retirement, and they might not even end up retiring at all. Maybe you're fine with that, but personally I would rather have something in retirement to live off. The other thing that the report said, which I thought was quite depressing, was that the only hope really for your average person in their 30s is an inheritance, which means if you want to be wealthy, the odds are really stacked against you. Yes, you might somehow make it rich, and that's brilliant if you do, but the chances are if you're going to be wealthy, it's going to be because your baby boomer parents or grandparents or somebody in your family leaves you some cash. And obviously you don't want your parents to die, but that is the point where you might find that you have enough to buy a house, or if you have already bought a house, you might suddenly have enough to put a little bit into a pension. And that, unfortunately, is for lots of people the only way they're ever going to feel like they have enough money. And of course, lots of people don't have wealthy parents. It's a stereotype to say that all baby boomers are wealthy. And so unfortunately, those people are really, really struggling because they won't have help onto the housing ladder. Personally, I had help onto the housing ladder from parents or my parents-in-law, and we were very grateful for that, but we wouldn't have been able to manage without their contribution. And it was great for us that came when it did. But people whose parents don't have any money won't get that, and then they won't get the inheritance either. So it looks like 30s is a real dividing point for people in terms of wealth, and those who are able to get on the housing ladder and have wealthier parents manage the course much better and are able to save, and those that don't have the benefit of those things are stuck in lots of ways. We think there's lots of things that you can do, and saving something is better than nothing, and at the moment with low interest rates, then actually investing can be a good thing to do, as long as you can still manage any debt repayments that you have and it's not obviously taking food out of your mouth. You can invest from quite small amounts of small monthly contributions now, which is democratising investment, but a lot of people who aren't used to investing still feel a little bit uncomfortable with that. And we think that there is an argument now for people to have a look at investing instead of just putting your money into very, very low paying savings accounts. But anyway, lots more little tips and tricks on good with money. We've just done a guide actually to finances at 40. So if you're approaching 40 and you're feeling a bit scared about your future pension saving and your children's savings, do have a look at the guide, it might help. But yes, I think this report has really crystallised what a lot of people in their 30s already knew, which is that it's really, really hard, and it does need a bit of attention, unfortunately. We were born at the wrong time. Thanks for listening.